Hey everybody, Bob Horn here at Echo Bar Recording Studios in North Hollywood, California. Today we're here with Maor Appelbaum, long-term friend of mine, well-known mastering engineer. I think we've known each other 13 years. We've worked on a lot of projects together. Today we're here with the new Mojo analog tube vibe box called the Oven. Now, the Oven is a collaboration between Maor Appelbaum and Hindi Amps. So Maor, tell us, how did this new processor come to be?
Well, this originally started as an idea to fit my mastering needs. So it was supposed to be part of my custom setup. And I wanted a coloration, vibe, mojo, tone shaping, all combined unit that has the versatility and flexibility to go from really subtle hi-fi enhancement that you barely hear, but when you bypass, you feel they're missing, to something more extreme or aggressive or moderate, but all the functions that can go in between. And I really wanted something that will be of high quality and not just have one sweet spot. It's cool that you can have pieces of gear that have that sweet spot, but since I work on so many different types of music and so many different types of mixes come in through the door, I didn't want it to be like, oh, this can work just for that. I really wanted the palette of sonic options. It wasn't a quick thing. It took a while till we got it because you have ideas, you plan it, you have combinations of ideas. Some work, some don't work. Some you start and you figure out it doesn't work. You really work that process. And then after we got stuff that we really liked, then the prototyping process came in, and it was involved with a lot of trial and error and trying to figure out where you can go and push it harder and where it's too much. So after the prototyping was built, the first stages, it was back and forth between Chris and I. He would send me a unit. I would go in and test different settings and try different options of how to push the unit, and then decide, okay, we take this switch out, put this switch in, put this knob in. It's like a lot of that, and where do we apply certain things in the unit. And at the end, after so much work, we got a unit that can take the mastering grade quality and actually become a production unit. You can use this for recording, connecting preamps to it and sweetening the tones.
Right.
You can use this for mixing, sweetening, drums, synth, guitars, vocals, mix bus,
Right.
any instrument, stems, whatever, and of course for mastering. I personally use it for mastering because that's what I do, But
So on the inside, it's what? It's tubes, transformers. It has EQ, but not like parametric, but a more tonal wideband shaping. But it's also saturation blended with that. So it's kind of it's a bunch of things going on, right?
yeah, the unit is very interactive to itself, so any way you push it in one way will affect the other. It has tubes. The cook section is basically the tubes. It's solid state as well, and you can combine the tubes with the solid state.
Right.
The transformers are actually the least colored section of the unit. The transformers are there because it's part of the circuit. It's part of how things work on an electrical way, But the transformers are not in order to create the tone coloration. The tone coloration is really what's on the front, either the temp, cook, the burners, which is the low, mid, and top, and the sizzle. They're all working together. If you don't use the temp and the cook and you just use the burners, then it's more like tone shaping,
Right.
like very broadband EQing.
Yeah.
And you can add highs or subtract. You can add lows or subtract mids, the same thing. Although you'll notice that the subtraction sometimes sounds different than the add-on. Although it's the same area, but how it feels is different.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be very creative on shaping stuff with it. The sizzle is only adding. And that's kind of like the upper range that makes it really spaciousness and opens it up. The way we labeled things is to be on a musical level. Although talks about oven and kitchen work and whatever that, but it was to put you out of the technical terms. I didn't want you to think of frequencies.
Yeah.
I wanted you to think about ranges in the mind. You know, like, oh, I need more low end. Let's go for the lower area. I need more sizzle. Well, it's, you know, how you hear sizzle on a frying pan. So
What's cool is that each, as far as when it comes to EQ or the tone, each range, low, mid, high, and then the sizzle, they have alternates of ranges. So if you're on the low and you boost it and it's just too low, you can flip that switch and now it's a different area of the low that might work better, you know. I've also noticed, and this is my favorite thing, this is what excited me about the unit, is that you can do things that on a normal processor, whether it's a saturation box in a plugin or an EQ, like tonight I had a stereo mix and I put it across the mix and I boosted a bunch of the mid range, and on any regular EQ that would sound so horrible on a finished mix. It's like no mix would need that much mid range, but this actually was useful, and it's just amazing. And the sizzle has got to be one of the smoothest high end knobs to open up a mix I've ever heard. It's like you cannot make it hurt. It's crazy how that works. So pretty impressed with that.
well, that's it's there to impress. It's there to make the things sound more expensive.
Yeah.
You know, like you run a track through it. If you set it right, of course, because you have to set it to make it like that. It can sound like it was recorded better or mixed better, or, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've had mine now for 3 weeks, I think, 4 weeks, and I've probably put it on 150 things, just individual instruments, whole mixes, and it's hard to get a bad sound, and you can usually get multiple useful sounds, and that's what's going back to like what you said. If you take like a famous old Pultec EQ or something, it's like, okay, you're putting it on a vocal. What do? You boost the 10K and you might boost a little bit of 100. If you put on a kick drum, you might boost a little 5K and a little bit of 60. And every time you go to a vocal or kick drum, you're doing those same things again. It's like that's what that box does. This unit, you can do 3-4 different things per instrument, and then when you have a different version of that instrument, you can do 3-4 new things. So what I like about this is just the exploration of tone. That's probably the best way to talk about it for me. Just exploring, getting sounds, and making the audio better every time without fail. It's pretty unbelievable. So, thanks for making it.
Well, we're happy you like it and see the uses for it, because I find that today a lot of times I talk with people and they're like, oh, I don't use hardware much. I use in the box. I get everything I need in the box. And I get it, because in the box is very convenient and there's so much options there.
Yeah.
It's true. You know, in the box is really good nowadays. But I think that what this can bring to the table is additional stuff, even if you're just working in the box,
Yeah.
and this would be the only unit.
I will expand on what you're saying and say that when you brought this over, that was kind of my first thought, is like, oh, so now I'm going to have something. If I like this unit, I'll have something that I have to go to the trouble of plugging integrating into my DAW and printing it or recalling it, copying down the settings. And after I heard it, I was like, I don't care. I want this thing, because saturation wise, it screams analog to me. And I always hated saying that. I always argued for in the box, because I used to have an SSL with tons of gear, and one day I just beat a bunch of my SSL mixes mixing in the box, and that was when Pro Tools 11 came out. It was a new algorithm, and it sounded way better. The summing algorithm was better, it seemed, and I just kind of decided I can work so much faster with being in the box. And then last couple of years, I've been searching for certain pieces of gear that are better than in the box. Like, everyone knows the Bricasti reverb is phenomenal, and it's hard to beat that in the box, especially the longer the tail of the reverb, the harder it is for a plugin to compete, And there's just these few little things that it's like, okay, well, it's worth to go out of the box for that. And this one, above and beyond all of them, it's worth it to me to have it and use it. I keep it right up front so I can get to it easily. And every mix I put 10 to 20 things through it. Seriously, it's like it just makes things better. And I have 500 plugins. I buy them all because I get sessions and clients have different plugins and I want to have what they have so I can see what they did. I have all the plugins, you know. I know what they do, and this isn't in my plugins. You know, even 3 units put together, this isn't there. So I need this box. So I can say that this is worth going out of the box for sure.
So, you know, in mastering, a lot of people always have the concern of recallability. Is it detented? Is it switched? So in this case, it's continuous. And the reasoning behind that is a few very important reasons. One is that we find that the in-between settings are sometimes the magic spots for specific things. Mm-hmm. So if we had a detented or switched, then you wouldn't have those in-between settings. Right. You would probably have a few in-betweens, but not all the range. And the other thing that people are concerned by is how do we recall it if it's continuous? And when we designed the faceplate of this, it was very important for me as a mastering guy, so I can do recalls, that the range of the dial is big enough and the knobs are easily moved, and you can strategically put them exactly where the dotted lines are.
Right, it's easy. I've done it. I mean, it's the chicken head knobs, like from an old Fender amp, you know, and they have the really sharp point, and the notches, the visual notches you guys have, the little lines are there's enough of them where you can easily get it back to the exact same spot every time. I just do a quick iPhone video and then email it and put it in the Pro Tools folder, and it's super easy to put back, you know.
Mm-hmm. I actually write it on a piece of paper because I'm all analog, you know. but yeah, it's you're right. It's the chicken head knobs, and the coloration of the panel, the coloration, everything was labeled in a way in terms of the dialing, the edges, the chicken head knobs, so it will be easy to recall.
I actually don't even have to recall mine a lot because I usually put it on individual instruments and print it. The only time I have to do a recall is if I do use it on like the stereo bus or like a drum stem, but I even printed my drum stem the other day and it was fine, so didn't have to recall.
Another function that I want to mention is that we have the calibration knobs. Those act as a double purpose, and they're basically, first of all, to set the bypass to unbypass, and so you can go unbypass and bypass, so the same volume, in case the unit is not tweaked yet. And then even if it's tweaked, so you'll know where the reference point is. But it's also in case you want to push the unit harder, you can just push the calibration harder. And you made some examples like that.
Yeah, I discovered that. I used it for a couple of weeks without adjusting those. I aligned them and left them. And then the other day I started pushing them and just found like a whole nother world of possibilities on drums and some bass sounds. It's pretty cool. Even we did a guitar where we pushed the calibration and left everything else on the unit flat and just putting it in. It was like it was like almost like putting an amp plug-in on. It's just like all of a sudden you had this new sound of this guitar. So, but it was analog and it was cool. It sounded great.
Well, that's one of the things that you can do with the Calibrate, or if you're hitting it very hard and you need more headroom, you can back off.
Sure.
So that's kind of a function that has a lot of options to work with. Also, the other reasoning behind that is because tubes, you know, they change in time. And if you want to adjust your left and right, you know, to make them similar, that's one of the ways to do it.
Right.
You can adjust, you know, if a tube changes a tenth of a dB or 2/10 of a dB or whatever, you can adjust that. So, Bob, you had the unit for about 3-4 weeks. How easy was it to work with? Like how much time would take you to get a tone, let's say in a plug-in in the box or other gear, compared to how much it took you with this?
Time-wise, I'd say Well, like we just did an example earlier tonight with a stereo mix, and I got that sound in like 20 seconds or less, and it was great. And we sat here after the camera stopped rolling for a while, A-Bing it, and just, kind of marveling at what I had done. And not that I did anything special, it was just the settings just were really good. Uh, but I'd say the only reason sometimes it takes me longer on the oven is because I'm experimenting and I'm still learning the box. Like now I know what each knob does and switch, but like I said before, you can get different sounds that all work. So then you have a decision to make, and that's what's fun about it is like putting a stereo drum mix through and pushing the calibration so that it's saturated, and then fooling with the temp and cook and its different switches like the broil and the gas and the electric and all that, and seeing what happens, but then backing the calibration off and then just using the temp and cook and seeing what that difference is. And it's such a mojo box and a vibe box, and not just a specific distort 1 through 10 or bright 1 through 10. It's just like you said, everything's interactive. So if you push the temp more, the cook reacts differently and all that. And then the burners, which are the low, mid, and high, for those of you that don't know yet, the burners, the more you push the temp and cook, the more they change, and they're not as simple as before. So the only reason I spend more time with the oven than like a plug-in I've been using for 10 years is because there's decisions to make, which are all cool. It's like, do I like this one, which is great, or do I like this one, which is great, But if I know what I'm going for, it's very fast. Like that example I did earlier took me 20 seconds at the most, and it sounded great. Like there's nothing else to do. So it's both. It's slow and fast.
Well, when you use the burners without the temp in the cook, when they're on zero, that's just the tonal shaping, which still sounds really good.
Yeah.
But once you introduce temp to the picture and start moving it up, then those burners become like saturators. They sound different.
So they're like low, mid, high saturation.
In a way, yeah. But it's not just saturation. I don't like just to use the terminology because it's a very commonly used,
Sure.
and then it kind of, oh, I know what saturation is. No, it's different.
It is different.
It's not just saturation like you normally look at it. It puts the whole tonal shaping options in a more harmonic, rich situation.
Okay.
And then you can hear that when you push now the top burner or the low burner with the temp on, it sounds different than without the temp.
Yeah.
So you feel it more as saturated in those areas too.
I also noticed there's some kind of like compression you can get when I was doing drums and then the lead vocal tonight. I saw that we could get compression almost. And is that with the temp, or is it kind of pushing all of it?
The compression effect is part of the saturation.
Okay.
The more temp you push, the more you'll get that. Also, the more cook you'll do that.
Okay.
The cook will do that a lot to the low end. When you put the switch of the cook type to broil, it edges it a bit more and it feels more compressed. And then if you put the intensity of, move it to gas, you'll get it even more.
Okay.
So the unit itself can compress, not as a compressor, but more as an artifact of the saturation.
That's great.
Yeah.
Like what we were hearing earlier was on the drums, the snare was becoming, instead of like just a tight pop, the pop kind of subdued and then it lengthened, and it sounded very much like compression without any pumping. It just was like there wasn't, we weren't setting attack, release, and ratio and trying to get the least amount of pump with the most effect. It was just like we just cranked it up more and it was more, in pocket. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it can get that effect, especially the more you saturate, even in the cook or temp. You can get that effect of like more sustain to low end, or drums become very big, and you still get the transient, but then you get the body of it, like the sustain of the snare.
I guess it's so cool on 808s because the sustain that it adds, and but it's still a big, like you don't have to crush it to get, get that feeling. So
It's it's kind of combining the low end weight and the compression effect of the saturation. So you get the bigness, but then you get the lengthy sustain. Of course, if you don't want that lengthy sustain, you can saturate it less, or clean up the low end. That's possible too. There's a lot of options that you can play with, combining the coloration with the tone shaping. One thing that I should mention also is that you don't treat it as a normal EQ, because sometimes you can cut stuff with it and then compensate with other knobs, and then you'll have more low end but cleaner low end.
yeah, I saw that a couple times with the low burner that I would cut, and I was thinking of the sound because I always, when I hear a sound that I'm working on, I always think of, okay, what processors, usually plugins, do I want to put on this, and what do I need? I need the low end to be a certain way. I need it to be bigger or something. And I found myself, I think this was like last week, I was cutting on the burner, cleaning up the lows, but it didn't feel like I cut out a bunch of low end, and now the sound was smaller. That wasn't the case. So, and that was crazy, and that's why I'm still exploring this box, and I keep looking at it, by the way. But yeah, it's different. It's not just bass, mid, and treble.
Right. You can cut high end and boost the sizzle, and it will sound bright but not harsh.
Yeah.
You can cut low end and boost the temp and put some cook, and you'll get a lot of low end, but it would be less muddy. So yeah, so there's a lot of tricks that involve the there's, for each burner there is A and B. So you can, let's say you like to cut some of the big upper range of the bass, you can cut on the low burner at B, and then added the temper cook, and then you'll get tighter bass from low end. Same with the highs, you can do that too. Cut the highs and boost the sizzle, and then you'll get everything. So there's a lot of options. Also, the Bunsen will change how the top burner, and it will give you more presence. So there's that as well. And we also have another function, which is, for most people, probably not as useful, but for others it might be. And it's the burned function. It's like a lo-fiing, and it makes the whole unit sound not as good.
On purpose.
On purpose. And it is good for if you want to have a lo-fi segment, or you want to do a parallel with the lo-fi sound. And instead of putting a lot of EQs to get the lo-fi sound, you can actually get lo-fi,
Yeah.
for real.
Well, do you want to show us an example of what you would do on a stereo track real quick?
Sure, let's do it.
Let's do it.
What's cooking? Okay, well, we're going to see it now when we operate the oven on a 2-track mix bus. Now, you can consider this as processing your mix bus or mastering your mix. You will notice that the oven can add volume to the mix. Once you start applying the temp, you'll hear more volume added. With the cook, you'll hear a bit of that. And a combination of both, you'll hear much more. I call it free gain because it adds something that, even if I put a limiter on, won't be the same. The limiter will clamp it down much faster than when I'm adding this and adding less limiting afterwards. So when you're comparing the process and unprocessed, you can adjust your output flow knob, which is like a trimmer, like an attenuation knob, but at the same time you can actually use the gain and volume that it adds to the track. And then if you want to apply more limiting and volume later on, you can put a limiter, and you'll see that you're adding much more richness to the track, and at the same time you're clamping less with the limiter when you add the gain from this, where if you were just lowering the attenuation and adjusting the same level and then trying to achieve the same volume with putting the limiter on, they act differently. I personally like using the flow knob, which is like a trimmer, attenuation, whatever you want to call it. I like it to be in full, just so I can get that volume. So let's see how this works on the track. First of all, you can notice it's a well-balanced track. There's space between the instrumentation. Everything is in place. So the first thing I'll do is I'll put the unit on. So it's in the signal running through. You can immediately hear how the low end is being emphasized. Also, you notice there's more depth. You can hear the effects. So here's an example of kind of a broad stroke idea where I added quite a lot of low end, but it doesn't muddy it, and it doesn't cloudy it. Now we can go a bit more extreme if we want. This is a bit more extreme. As you notice, it pushes the drums further. We can also make it a bit more edgy. Now I want to show you how I take each knob and do with it what's possible. There's a lot of options here. So just for the temp, for example. Of course, there's a level change here, and it's, you know, a different. And now we adjusted the levels. You hear a difference in depth and tightness. Now I'm going to show you the cook. gain back. So as you noticed, this brings a lot of forwardness to the rhythm section. And it can also bring a lot of depth on the low end and give it that space that it needs while bringing it up. This unit is very musical in terms of how it sounds. Of course, today the word musical is something you hear a lot, but it was designed to be musical from the get-go. We didn't want something that's too abrasive. You can push it hard, but it has enough range that it will still sound really good. Let's try another track.